Today's episode is called Choosing God's Protection Over Other People's Projection. And I can tell you that this message is personal for me because what I will say is if you've ever had someone try to put you in a box, tell you who you're not, or try to limit you based on their own insecurities, this message is for you. Welcome to the Confidence Restored podcast, where faith meets real life to help you rise from anything life tries to throw your way. I'm your host, Tamiria Jordan, and around here we get mentally fit through faith, inspiration, and transformation. Today's episode is packed with real talk, honest reflection, and truth to help you walk boldly into your next with grace, clarity, and God-given confidence. Enjoy. So today we're going to talk about how can we stop internalizing what others say about us, and how do we start to walk in who God called us to be and really knowing who we are beyond other people's insecurities. So we're going to talk about how do we silence that noise? How do we stand tall in our truth? And how do we keep moving forward with regard to what God has called us to do and having unshakable confidence, aka faith? Because when God protects you, no projection can touch you. So let's get into it. I was thinking about this the other day. So actually, the topic came to me yesterday. I think I was driving, and what came to mind was God's protection over projection. And then I started to see some different things on social media, and it really made me think about how often people project their own insecurities and things of that nature onto other people because of their own life and lived experiences. And that's not necessarily a bad thing to share your lived experiences, but when we start to project those things onto other people, that's when it can become problematic, or when other people project those things onto us. And so I started thinking about my life. I was looking at some pictures of me from a few years back, and I said, wow, a memory popped up on Facebook from when I was modeling 12 years ago. And I thought to myself, I cannot believe how many years I struggled with body dysmorphia because of what people used to tell me as a child. And I carried those insecurities and those beliefs about myself into adulthood, where I always thought that I was bigger than I actually was. And so I had a mindset that I was never truly pleased or happy with my body. And so I was always feeling the need to overcompensate or do more, and feeling like when I did do whatever I did in terms of exercise, that it was never enough because I had a skewed view of how I looked. And when I thought about even this podcast, originally when I started it, I thought it was going to be about how you look, how you feel about yourself. But I learned that it's so much more than that. And so when I looked up the topic of projection in psychology today, they define it as the process of displacing one's feelings onto a different person, animal, or object. The term is most commonly used to describe defensive projection, attributing one's own unacceptable urges to another. And so the example they give is bullying. So someone ridiculing someone else about their insecurities, but the bully may actually be projecting their own struggle with self-esteem onto someone else. And so we see it happening all the time. And a lot of times that projection is that unconscious discomfort, according to psychology today, that can lead people to attribute unacceptable feelings or impulses to someone else to avoid confronting them. And I heard a really good video on YouTube actually yesterday. It's by a gentleman by the name of Nelson, and I'll make sure that I get his last name. I want to say it's Nelson Schumann, but I will double check to confirm. But his message was really good, and he talked about how even as a believer, you may be attacked by other believers for the very things that those people do, but they will project their feelings onto you. And it is Nelson Schumann on YouTube. And the title of his message is When You Walk in Righteousness, You Will Be Persecuted by Fake Christians. And I thought to myself, wow, that is a powerful message and an example of projection. But when I think about, as I mentioned earlier, my views on how I looked and how I felt about myself were often the result of what other people projected on me. So if people are afraid to do something that maybe you aren't afraid to do or that you aren't afraid to try, they may tell you that you can't do it. And it's not that you can't do it, it may be that they are not comfortable doing it or less comfortable doing it. And so they will project those things onto you to tell you what you can and cannot do. And so that brings me to First Samuel 15. And when we think about these types of things, the first step is really knowing what projection is and being able to see it for what it is so that we can figure out, okay, how do I silence this noise? How do I stand in my truth? How do I keep moving forward? And so this morning I started reading First Samuel 15. And this is a scripture that actually was the basis for me really starting even this podcast, because for years I would stop doing what I felt led to do because I would let other people project onto me. So, meaning I would let them project their fears onto me about what I could do and who I could be. Even things such as communication, I struggled with after a while because of what someone said, not because of the fact that I could not communicate. It was just that they were upset that I communicated the truth they were not ready to hear. And so when I think about First Samuel 15, in the beginning of First Samuel 15, it talks about how Samuel said unto Saul in the first verse, the Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man, woman, infant, suckling, ox, sheep, camel, and ass. And Saul gathered the people together and numbered them in Telaim, 200,000 footmen and 10,000 men of Judah. And Saul came to a city of Amalek and laid wait in the valley. And Saul said unto the Canaanites, go, depart, get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For ye shewed kindness to all of the children of Israel when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. Saul smote the Amalekites from Havilah until thou comest to Shur, that is over against Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and of the oxen and of the fatlings and the lambs and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them, but everything that was vile and refused, that they utterly destroyed. Then came the word of the Lord unto Samuel, saying, it repenteth me that I have set up Saul to be king, for he's turned back from following me, and hath not performed my commandments. And it grieved Samuel, and he cried unto the Lord all night. And when Samuel rose early to meet Saul in the morning, it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set him up a place, and has gone about and passed on and gone down to Gilgal. And Samuel said to Saul, and Saul said unto him, blessed be thou of the Lord, I have performed the commandment of the Lord. So Saul was named king. Saul was given a commandment. Saul did not completely complete that commandment. And so in verse 14, it says, and Samuel said, what meaneth then this bleating of the sheep in mine ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? And Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said unto Saul, stay, and I will tell thee what the Lord hath said to me in this night. And he said to him, say on. And Samuel said, when thou wast little in thine own sight, wast thou not made the head of the tribes of Israel? And the Lord anointed thee king over Israel. And the Lord sent thee on a journey and said, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they be consumed. Wherefore then didst thou not obey the voice of the Lord, but didst fly upon the spoil, and did evil in the sight of the Lord? And Saul said unto Samuel, yea, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone to the way which the Lord sent me, and have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took of the spoil sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in Gilgal. And Samuel said, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because thou hast rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. And the reason that I read this is because verse 23, and actually verse 22 through 24, where it talks about Saul disobeying God. But what really got me is verse 24 that says, and Saul said unto Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord in thy words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. So Saul had a call. Saul disregarded the commandment. Then Saul did not necessarily want to own up to the fact that he did not do what God called him to. And then he was reminded that that is also rebellion. Partial disobedience is considered disobedience to whatever God may have called us to do. And then it says that Saul admitted he sinned, for he transgressed the commandment of the Lord in thy words, because he feared the people and obeyed their voice. How many of us have probably been in a situation where we have obeyed the voice of someone else? God may have given us a vision, a dream, whatever it may be. And because we listen to other people, we delay it, or we don't do what we feel called to do. And the reason that we are all called to do something different is because the word reminds us that we are all branches on God's tree, essentially. And so it tells us that we should do what we need to do according to the word, because God can actually utilize that to bring people into the kingdom. And so, and this is in John 15. So in John 15, it talks about the vine and the branches. And literally, starting in verse 1, it says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. And so when we think about that, I'm like, okay, this is good. And so you keep reading in verse 3, you are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself, it must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. So we need to remain in God the Father as the gardener to bear fruit. So then it keeps going in verse 5. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up and thrown into the fire and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. So, and we're called to be disciples. We're called to bring other people into believing in God and knowing who God is. Why is it that we listen to the projection of other people? So I'm going to jump down to verse 18 where it starts talking about how the world hates the disciples. So God may call you, but other people may hate you too. And then it brings into call and brings into remembrance that projection. They may hate you because they are not in the vine. They are not connected to God. And so when I think about silencing those voices, the first step is remaining in God, because when we remain in God, God will make us fruitful. But in verse 18 and John 15, it says, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, we do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember what I told you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. They will treat you this way because of my name, for they do not know the one who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not be guilty of sin, but now they have no excuse for their sin. Whoever hates me hates my Father as well. If I had not done among them the works no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. As it is, they have seen, and yet they have hated both me and my Father. But this is to fulfill what is written in their law. They hated me without reason. So some of you feel like you have been hated without reason. There are people that just don't like you because they don't like you. But what I will tell you is that is noise. So, how you silence that noise is you get close to God, you get in God's word, you talk to God, and you let the Holy Spirit minister to you. And in John 15, it talks about the work of the Holy Spirit. When the advocate comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth who goes out from the Father, he will testify about me, and you also must testify, for you have been with me from the beginning. So if God knows us, God knows your name, God knows who you are, God knows what you will do, what you may struggle with. If he knows these things, we have a choice. God is not a bully. God is not going to force us to believe in him. God is going to give us that choice because we have free will. God is saying, you know what? I'm going to give you the choice to choose me. So are you going to choose my protection or are you going to choose other people's projection? And I said, okay, I really started to understand a little bit better. Like there have been times in my life where I feel like I've been disobedient because I was listening to people. And it reminds me of a time when I was in the workplace and I had shared some personal information with a colleague whom I thought was a friend. And that person turned and used that information against me to keep me from applying for a job that I knew I was qualified for. And so then I was upset with that person because I said, they knew my personal situation and they used that to try to to discourage me from applying for that position. Now, in hindsight, it was a lesson learned, but similar to Saul, he obeyed the voice of the people and not what God commanded him to do. And at that time, I will say I was not as connected in terms of reading my word and going to God before I made certain decisions. So I did not end up even applying for that job. But then I felt frustrated. I felt angry. And I was like, this person used information to keep me from doing something that I knew that I could have done. But it wasn't that person's fault because I allowed their projection to stop me. So now I have to deal with myself. I have to take a step back and say, okay, well, you didn't apply. They didn't tell you that you couldn't. They just used information that you gave them against you so that you would not apply because they figured that it could persuade you to make a different decision. And so when I think about that, it brings me back to First Samuel. But when I tell y'all, it is so good when you keep going. So then I was like, okay, so Saul disobeyed God. Saul was disobedient. But then in chapter 16, starting in verse 1, and the Lord said unto Samuel, how long wilt thou mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill thine horn with oil and go. I will send thee to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided me a king among his sons. So Samuel goes, if you know this story, Samuel goes out and he goes to Jesse's house to seek out the next king. But in verse 7, but the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth. For man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. So when Samuel gets there, Jesse calls in his sons based on their statute, their appearance, based on what they look like, their stature, excuse me. But God had already told Samuel, don't look at their countenance, don't look at what they look like. God looks at the heart. So he ends up calling in David from outside. And because Samuel says in verse 11, and Samuel said unto Jesse, are here all thy children? And he said, there remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. Come on. And Samuel said unto Jesse, send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. And he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and withal of a beautiful countenance and goodly to look at, And the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brethren, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said unto him, Behold, now an evil spirit from God troubleth thee. Let our Lord now command thy servants which are before thee to seek out a man who is a cunning player on an harp. And it shall come to pass when the evil spirit from God is upon thee, that he shall play with his hand, and thou shalt be well. And Saul said unto his servants, Provide me now a man that can play well, and bring him to me. Then answered one of the servants and said, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, that is cunning in playing, and a mighty, valiant man, and a man of war, and prudent in matters, and a comely person, and the Lord is with him. Wherefore Saul sent messengers unto Jesse and said, Send me David thy son, which is with the sheep. And so I said, Okay, God, this is powerful, because God didn't look on his countenance, but God looked at the heart, and God was with David. And so what I want to encourage someone is that even when other people project onto you, God is with you. Now, at this point, Saul was not angry with David because Saul needed David. David had what Saul needed to drive out the evil spirit. And so when I think about standing tall in your truth, David literally knew who he was. Saul needed David to silence the noise of the evil spirits, which is really funny how that worked out, because he disobeyed God and now he ended up having evil spirits. He needed David to play the harp to get rid of the noise. And so David was just who David was. And David came to Saul in verse 21 and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David, I pray thee, stand before me, for he hath found favor in my sight. And it came to pass, when the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, that David took an harp and played with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. So now let's keep going. 1 Samuel 17. This is where the story takes an interesting turn. Now, in 1 Samuel 17, this is when Saul starts to get jealous of David. So this is where Saul starts to project a little bit, because now he's like, all right, now this David can, and actually it was in chapter 18, but in 1 Samuel 17 is when David slews Goliath, and God was with David. So no one else could defeat this giant Goliath, because in 1 Samuel 17, verse 24, it says, Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. Now, the Israelites have been saying, Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel. David asked the men standing near him, What will be done to the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, This is what will be done for the man who kills him. When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the man, he burned with anger at him and asked, Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle. Now, what have I done? Said David. Can't I even speak? He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him. Saul replied, You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. So now, because of their fear of Goliath, they're telling David, Oh, you can't fight him. Like, one, who do you think you are? You are young. You can't fight Goliath. Surely this giant will overtake you, because this giant is skilled in war. Sounds a lot like the devil. The enemy tries to trick us to think, Oh, Who do you think you are that you can fight this devil? This devil is skilled in war. You are too young. You are too young in the word. You are too young to be able to fight this enemy. But David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. Much like Jesus, we are the sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, go and the Lord be with you. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the stream and put them in the pouch in his shepherd's bag with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine with his shield bearer in front of him kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his God. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David said to the Philistine, you come against me with a sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. David was not afraid. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. So literally, David stood tall in his truth. He said, if God protected me from these lions and bears, when I was protecting my sheep, I know he is still with me. I don't need your armor. What I need is the Lord. And so for someone, that message in and of itself will bless you because it will help you stand tall in your truth, knowing that other people who project onto you may feel like you don't have what it takes because that is their own insecurity. When we think about the definition of projection, they will project their insecurity onto you. Even his brother said, like, oh, you just came down here to watch the battle. You didn't come to fight. And David said, trust me, with God by my side, I will be all right. And so when I think about that, I'm like, okay, this is great. But the projection continues because in 1 Samuel 18, Saul grows fearful of David, the same David that he loved. So in verse 1, it says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David. Now, Jonathan was Saul's son, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. So this is after he defeated Goliath. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Verse 5, whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs, and with timbrels and lyres. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully on Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the lyre. So David was still playing his harp, as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had departed from Saul. Not because David did anything wrong, but because Saul was disobedient. So now Saul is projecting, you disobeyed God, and now you're mad at David because David has God's favor. This may help someone also as you are moving forward, as you stand in your truth, right? First, you silence the noise. You're like, you know what? I'm not going to listen to everything that you say because I know God is on my side. But now I'm going to stand tall in my truth. I know who I am, I know whose I am. But then when you keep moving forward with unshakable confidence, AKA faith, hence the title of this show, Confidence Restored, you know who you are, you know whose you are. Now the enemy gets mad. So Saul, being afraid of David, so Saul is projecting now his own fears, tried to take David out, but he missed. And he knew that the Lord was with David and had departed from him. That was in verse 12, First Samuel 18. So continuing on. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men, and David led the troops in their campaigns. And everything did he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. Saul said to David, here is my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you in marriage. Only serve me bravely and fight the battles of the Lord. For Saul said to himself, now he didn't tell David, but he said to himself, I will not raise a hand against him. Let the Philistines do that. So he was sending David out to be killed. But David said to Saul, who am I? And what is my family or my clan in Israel that I should become the king's son in law? So when the time came for Merab, Saul's daughter, to be given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel of Meholah. Now, Saul's daughter Michal was in love with David, and when they told Saul about it, he was pleased. I will give her to him, he thought, so that she may be a snare to him, so that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. So Saul said to David, now you have a second opportunity to become my son-in-law. Then Saul ordered the attendants, speak to David privately and say, look, the king likes you, and his attendants all love you. Now become his son-in-law. They repeated these words to David, but David said, do you think it is a small matter to become the king's son in law? I am only a poor man and little known. When Saul's servants told him what David said, Saul replied, say to David, the king wants no other price for the bride than 100 Philistine foreskins to take revenge on his enemies. Saul's plan was to have David fall by the hands of the Philistines. So Saul is plotting on David and he's trying to get other people to take David out because he didn't have the courage to do it himself again because he failed the first time. When the attendants told David these things, he was pleased to become the king's son in law. So before the allotted time elapsed, David took his men with him and went out and killed 200 Philistines and brought back their foreskins. They counted out the full number to the king, so that David might become the king's son-in-law. Then Saul gave him his daughter Michal in marriage. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved David, Saul became still more afraid of him, and he remained his enemy the rest of his days. The Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officers, and his name became well known. So, when we choose God's protection over other people's projection, God will help us move forward in faith. God will help us. So other people don't necessarily have to believe in what God called you to do as long as you do. So for someone today, I hope that you feel encouraged and you realize that just because other people may not be able to handle God's call on your life or handle the blessings that's on your life, it does not mean that you are not blessed. It also means that you will not go through tests because David was continuously tested. David did not know why Saul was saying the things Saul was saying, but God was with him. And so I will leave you all with Hebrews 11:1. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. We don't have to see it to believe it. We just have to trust in God's word. We have to trust that God is with us no matter what it looks like. And that's what David did. So David's story in terms of, him defeating Goliath, and when they told David what he couldn't do, he stood for the Lord and said, "You know what? I can do it because God is going to bring me through." He wasn't thinking about their projection, but David was anointed as the future king. And then Saul was tormented by an evil spirit, but he needed David to help silence the tormenting spirits. So I was like, it's really interesting how that works. And then even David, when we think about it, David kept the sheep. And you think about our lives, a lot of us, we are God's sheep. Jesus is our shepherd. And so we are protected. So, as my late great grandmother would say, keep on keeping on, and know that when you choose God's protection over other people's projection, you will be okay on this day and every day. So, on that note, I just pray that you all will be blessed, that you would have a great day, and that you will remember who you are and whose you are because it matters. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Confidence Restored podcast by CC America. It means the world that you take time out of your day to join us on this journey of faith, inspiration, and transformation. If something in today's episode spoke to you, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. And don't forget to tell a friend because we're all in this together and you never know who needs a little encouragement today. If you'd like to support the show, you can also treat us to coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ccamerica. Every sip helps us keep this message going. As always, stay encouraged, stay grounded in faith, and remember, you have everything you need to rise again. Your confidence is not gone. It's just waiting to be restored. And before I go, just a quick note. This podcast is for educational and inspirational purposes only. While I love sharing personal insights as well as our guests, some of us are not licensed therapists, counselors, or medical professionals. So if you're going through something heavy, please seek the support of a qualified expert. With that said, I can't wait to connect with you again soon. Until next time, be blessed, stay confident, and keep moving forward in faith.